Journey in the Life of the Pharaoh, Secrets and Knowledge, Episode 1. The civilization of Paranoiac is one of the most famous civilizations in the world, and it's considered the oldest and greatest of civilizations. What distinguishes this civilization is that it included among its details many secrets that science and scientists were unable to interpret. Some of them were puzzled by these scholars in their attempts to explain it. The ancient Egyptians had a great deal of ingenuity and intelligence, and this made many of the traces of their history preserved and existing to the present time. Ancient Egyptian civilization surrounds many secrets and mysteries, which has made the whole world draw its attention to it to know those secrets and how that civilization reached such a degree of greatness. The Hyksos are nomadic peoples of Amorite origin. Egypt entered Sinai from a period of weakness during the end of the rule of the Middle Kingdom at the end of the 14th dynasty. History experts did not agree on their origin, but they're probably the owners of many Asian origins, including the Sami origin, so that the names of their kings were Amorite. Amorites such as the Hawks of Hari, Kyanabubis, Kamudi, Aznam, and the gods of Chios-Semites like Baal and Anat, and moved from the Negev desert into the Sinai Peninsula and then to Egypt. What can be confirmed on the basis of historical evidence is that the seizure of the Hyksos on Egypt was not in the form of a sudden barbaric raid as described by Marathon. Archaeological excavations do not refer to acts of vandalism and destruction and do not indicate a fundamental change in the composition of the population, customs, traditions, and funerary rituals. In fact, there was no raid in the right sense, but there were a slow infiltration and a historical penetration. And it's also certain that the invaders who took over Egypt did not belong to one race. All the phenomena indicate that they were a mixture of different people, most of them the Semites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, but there were also some other Asian peoples. The Egyptians used to watch small individuals or groups of these Asians infiltrate the Nile Valley in order to earn a living. They called them different names such as Amo, Statio, and Retino. It is sometimes meant for the country and sometimes for the tribes. It's known that the countries of the Near East have been subjected to the attacks of the Indian tribes, European from the north and east, and the migration of groups to the south, such as the Hittites, who settled in Anatolia, and the Kashians, who took over Babylon and ruled it for more than 5 centuries, from 1700 to 1175 BC, who later founded the kingdom of Mitanni in northern Mesopotamia. It seems that waves of these immigrants reached Syria and Palestine and paid a portion of the population of those of the country who kept them to enter Egypt with them. Egypt was then in a state of chaos after the extinction of the 12th issue around 1785 BC and the establishment of the 13th dynasty 1786 to 1633 BC, which punished the kings quickly and increased the strife and revolutions, vacate the kingdom, and independently Basha Arab under the rule of the 14th dynasty 1786 to 1213 BC. The Hyksos, which had infiltrated and settled throughout the eastern delta, benefited from the weakness of the central Egyptian government and took over the site of the ancient city of Heret Arana in the eastern delta. There was a temple of the god Set, and the Hyksos rebuilt and expanded it because they saw in this ancient Egyptian god the brother and enemy of Osiris, the embodiment of the god Baal, or the Sabbath of the Semites. They took care of the cults of Sit and Sukt developed. The Hyksos played an important role in influencing the Egyptian civilization by introducing new ideas and techniques that were a major reason for keeping ancient Egypt within the horizons of the Bronze Age culture, to which Syria was a central center. As a result, there were many developments and innovations in Egypt during the Hyksos era in various fields. The use of bronze was developed and the bronze material became more common. The arched sword and the arch were incorporated into Egypt in the area of semicircular seals that entered Egypt at the end of the Old Kingdom era. To the common goddess of the Middle Kingdom era, the Hyksos came to its manufacture in large numbers and became more widespread before, and they played a major role in introducing the use of horses for riding and in the manufacture of horse-drawn vehicles. This role is highlighted by the wood used in the manufacture of these vehicles and in the Canaanite terms that were launched in its parts, as well as the role of people coming from Syria in its leadership and maintenance. Indeed, the Hyksos era cannot be described as degenerate and barbaric, as Manathon did, because the Hyksos practiced the traditions of the Egyptians, quoted their civilization, worshipped their gods, used hieroglyphic writing, and relied on Egyptian officials to manage the affairs of the state. Many of the country's inhabitants seemed to cooperate willingly with the Hyksos, who took care of the construction of buildings and temples, which is done on a taste of art, although it does not reach the level of the likes of the reign of the central monarchy. Thanks also to the reign of the Hyksos in preserving many of the literary and scientific texts that their kings encouraged to reproduce and publish. In the reign of King Second Ra II towards 1580 BC was good and had reached the power and political status of a manner made the clash with the Hyksos is inevitable. This prompted the king of the Hyksos, Abu, to fabricate excuses to start the conflict. In this struggle, Suknen-Ra achieved some success, but he fell fast, 1575 BC, in a battle with the Hyksos, and there were fatal wounds and injuries in his skull. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Kammu, 1560 to 1570 BC. He was the last of the 17th dynasty. His rule lasted only 5 years, following the war initiated by his father, who launched a surprise attack on the Hyksos strongholds bordering the border with army troops and a large Nile fleet. It moves north until it reaches the capital of the Hyksos itself. The ancient texts that date back to his reign refer to his possession of 300 cedar wood compound laden with arms, gold, silver, and supplies, as well as the Egyptians who were appeasing the enemy, and arrested his men. In the meantime, a messenger sent by the king of the Hyksos to Prince of Nuba in Kush-Sedan urged him to attack the territory of the good from the south. Kammu did not hesitate to send a force occupying the marine oasis, frustrated plans of his enemies, and then returned to the end of the campaign season after he spent on rebellion by one of his followers. The texts mention the name of Kammu and his brother Ahmose, who came after him, at the second waterfall in Nubia, potentially impregnating Kammu in the territory of Nubia to that location. After the killing of King Suknen-Ra in his wars against the Hyksos, the Egyptian state of Upper Egypt was besieged from the Hyksos to the north and from the Nubian kings to the south, and after the killing of King Kammis, and then transferred to Ahmose I, who was only 10 years old, and his mother was looking for training and fighting with the warriors when he reached the age of 19. Some of his men picked up a letter from the king of the Hyksos to the kings of Nubia, urging them to crawl on to Teba, leading Ahmose to attack Hyksos and defeating them in several battles, and launching several external attacks on them in their original lands. War on the fighter of the Hyksos has returned. It was the center of worship which prompted most of the pharaohs of Egypt to be interested, especially during the era of the modern state, where they built many temples belonging to the gods of ancient Egyptians. These temples were built of heavy stones, and perhaps the most important of these temples is the Temple of Amun-Re. Also includes the city between its borders many of the palaces of the pharaohs. Because of its presence on the eastern bank of the Nile, the temples were built of heavy stones, because they believed they were immortal. As for the palaces of the pharaohs and houses of the population was built of bricks milk, because of their belief it's not for eternity, which explains the existence of some temples to the present time and the disappearance of palaces. Ahmose I was a pharaoh and founder of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. He was a member of the Theban royal house, the son of Pharaoh Seqenen-Retau, and brother of the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, Kammu. During the reign of his father or grandfather, Thebes rebelled against Hyksos, the ruler of Lower Egypt, when he was 7 years old. His father was killed and he was about 10 when his brother died of unknown causes after reigning only 3 years. Ahmose I assumed the throne after the death of his brother, and upon coronation became known as the Lord of Strength is Ra. During his reign, Ahmose completed the conquest and expulsion of the Hyksos from the Nile Delta, restored Theban rule over the whole of Egypt, and successfully reasserted Egyptian power in its formerly subject territories of Nubia and Canaan. He then reorganized the administration of the country, reopened quarries, mines, and trade routes, and began massive construction projects of a type that had not been undertaken since the times of the Middle Kingdom. This building program culminated in the construction of the last pyramid built by native Egyptian rulers. Ahmose's reign laid the foundations for the new kingdom under which Egyptian power reached its peak. His reign is usually dated from the mid-16th century BC. Ahmose descended from the Theban 17th dynasty. His grandfather and grandmother, Senaktenre Ahmose and Tetishri, had at least 12 children, including Sekenre Tau and Ahotep I. The brother and sister, according to the tradition of Egyptian queens, married. Their children were Kamu, Ahmose, and several daughters. Ahmose I followed in the tradition of his father and married several of his sisters, making Ahmose Nefertari his chief wife. They had several children, including daughters Meritamun B, Sitamun A, and sons Siamun A, Ahmose Ankh, Amenhotep I, and Ramos A. The A and B designations after the names are the convention used by Egyptologists to distinguish between royal children and wives that otherwise have the same name. They may also have been parents of Mutnofret, who would become the wife of a later successor, Thutmose I. Ahmose Ankh was Ahmose's heir apparent, but he preceded his father in death sometime between Ahmose's 17th and 22nd regnal year. Ahmose was succeeded instead by his eldest surviving son, Amenhotep I, with whom he might have shared a short co-regency. There was no distinct break in the line of the royal family between the 17th and 18th dynasties. The historian Manetho, writing much later during the Ptolemaic kingdom, considered the final expulsion of the Hyksos after nearly a century and the restoration of native Egyptian rule over the whole country a significant enough event to warrant the start of a new dynasty. Join us with a new episode to continue our journey in the ancient Egypt. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive everything that's new.